Hi guys, this is Navneet. I am a software engineer at Bloomberg, and in this video, we'll look at Python decorators. And so basically, we'll look at what they are, how to create them, and how to use them. So, basically, Python decorators are just simply functions that take another function and just modify the behavior of the input function. I know this sounds confusing, but it's really not. So, we'll look at how it works, and for that, we first need to understand how functions are treated in Python. So, in Python, uh, functions are basically first class objects. So, what do I mean by this? What I mean by this is that functions can be passed around and can be used as arguments to another functions. So basically, you can understand functions like any other object in Python, like float, list, string, integer, anything. So, like for an example, we can say like, for example, if you have a function called say the name of a person, and we just basically return the f string with the name of the person, and uh, and then probably we have another function uh, which is say good morning or something, and this also takes the name. We return another f string. It just says good morning, name of the person. And so the idea is that if, for example, you have a function which just greets a person, and this takes as the input the name of the person. So, I mean, you could do some complex logic inside this, but like simply, for example, we can just like you could have just probably written something like this, like uh, if morning, sorry, if morning, you just call say good morning and give the name of the person, or we could do say name of the person, right? We can do this, or you could have just instead of this, you could like do this logic outside, like in some other function, and you can probably like you can actually give this function the in like a function argument. um, so this basically does what it does is that you can just call this function here and give it the give some input. So I mean, a better way to do this is like, for example, if you have a function called greet underneath, and you can modify the behavior of this function. For that, you can just do basically return like the function, and like the name would always be underneath, right? And so what we do is that we can actually, so here we can call greet underneath with either say name, and we can call greet underneath with either say good morning, right? So what happens here is like if we run this function, uh, okay, my bad. So we also need to print this because I'm just returning it. So if we do this, yep. So as you can see, uh, we get hello Namneet and good morning Namneet. So the idea is basically that you can actually pass functions, like in this case, say name is a function, say good morning is a function. You can pass the function as an input or like as an argument to another function like greet Namneet. Um, so basically, what this means is that greet Namneet can take any reference to a function. And so like when we pass the a reference to a function, So we basically don't do this because this calls the function at this point. So instead of that, we just pass a reference to the function. And I guess, yeah, that's it. So, I mean, that's all you have to understand from this. It's basically that functions are treated as first class objects inside of Python. So, now we'll look at how inner functions can be created inside Python. So, let's just get rid of this. Just get rid of this. We'll look at inner functions. So the idea is that you can actually define functions inside of other functions, and like such functions are called inner functions. So for example, you can define like a parent function, and this could probably have like a string which it's get printed. It's called calling from parent function. You could also have like a first child function which prints calling from first child function, and you could also have like a second child function calling from second child function, and you can also call these functions inside this function now. So for example, if I do this, what do you expect the output to be if I call the parent function? So say if I call parent here, what do you think the output would be? Let's clear the console up and let's see what the output comes. So the output is basically calling from the parent function, which is here, then calling from the second child function and calling from the first child function. So basically the order that in which the inner functions are defined, it does not matter. But like how they are executed, that's the order that is followed. So since we call second child before first child, we get the print function, like the print statement inside the second child executed before the first child. Also, the inner functions are not defined until the parent function is called. So basically they are locally scoped to the parent. They only exist inside the parent as local variables. So if you try to call first child outside of this function, uh, it should not work. So if we call, so we basically get name error, first child is not defined, which makes sense because this basically this first child is acting as a local variable inside this function. So there is no first child present outside the scope of this function. Once this function ends, once this function exits, the first child does not exist anymore. We can also now we'll look at how we can actually return functions from functions. So like Python allows us to use functions as return values. Uh, so I mean, all this is basically like a precursor to decorators. So like if you understand how functions work and how we can write in the functions, how we can use functions as objects, how we can return functions from functions, it would be much easier to understand how actually decorators work. So in this, we can modify this example itself. So first we'll remove this reference because this does not exist. We can modify this parent function and just define first child. You can just return anything here. Say we just return a string. So hi, I am Navneet, and then we have like a second child, and we return call me Liam, something like that, and we can have like a logic here or something. So basically, the idea is that we could probably have like an integer representing the function that we want to return. So we could have like a choice variable, like anything you can name it anything. And if, like, for example, if choice is equal to 0, we return first child. Otherwise, we return the second child. So, like, note, we are actually returning the first child without parenthesis. This means that we are actually returning a reference to the first child function. So we are returning a reference to the first child function. However, if we would have done probably like, so we will come to that. So I mean, what we can do is that we can actually use these references to see what is being returned by this parent choice function. So we can say like first is equal to parent 1, or no, sorry, 0, and second is equal to parent of 1. Then we can just print first, and we can see also like what happens if we execute first. Okay, so as you can see, first function is basically a so the first print statement returns us like the reference to the first function, so the first child function. This is the reference to that, and the second function basically executes this function. So instead of this, if we would have done like instead of this, if we would have done this thing, then this would have just returned hi, I am Navneet. So if you can just run this, exactly, yep. So this means um, that we can actually like use functions just as objects inside of Python. So you can return functions, you can play with functions as arguments, you can absolutely do anything that you would do with an object, for example, inside of a function. You can do all those things inside a function, like for a function as well. I mean, uh, and you can also use functions as you can also define functions within functions, and like it's extremely flexible how you want to work with functions inside Python. So now that we have done with all these things, so I mean, we understand how we can return functions, how we can define inside functions, and sorry, I mean inner functions, and how functions actually work. We can actually write a very simple decorator, and I mean, we can actually see how decorators work. So this decorator would be extremely simple, but this would actually cover like the basic design of a decorator in Python. So we'll see how we can do that in the next video. Thanks for watching this video.